Alright, so after arrangement, you enter the mixing stage in a production process, and in that case, it's all about balancing and leveling frequencies, adjusting volumes, dynamics, and sound enhancement. If we take a closer look, mixing is quite a balancing act, and it's not always done by the producer. Sometimes it's being sent out to a mixing engineer who specializes in mixing. And when mixing, you have to take care of volume levels of the different track elements, frequency conflicts, for example, between similar sounding instruments, different dynamics, also panning and stereo balance. You really want to make sure you have everything sitting nicely in your stereo spectrum as good as possible. Also, you're trying to achieve an overall coherence of your sounds, and you're trying, if possible, to enhance sounds. The final goal is making sure the track sounds great on as many playback systems as possible. Let's quickly talk about general mixing practices. You could use reference tracks. For example, if you want to make your track sound like some other track that is maybe commercially available or something, use that as a reference track and then listen closely how they mix their elements. The second point is important. Never put a limiter on your master while you're still mixing, because that will kind of distort your mixing decisions. And also avoid falling into the louder sounds better trap. Usually your ear perceives louder things as better, but you want to avoid that in mixing. Also, another interesting thing is sounds don't have to sound great in solo. They have to sound good in the context of the mix. And that can mean sometimes you have an element, if you solo it, it sounds kind of weird, but if you put it together with your mix, it makes perfect sense and fills it up nicely. So this can happen. Always keep that in mind. Also keep in mind to cut everything you don't need. Put an EQ on everything. Cut off the lows where you don't want to play bass, and make sure you leave room for your actual bass. Also be sure to sidechain whenever needed or possible, or whenever it makes sense. If you want to have your drums and kicks cut through nicely, make sure to sidechain everything that has kind of attacks and signal in those frequencies. Also, you can create groups and buses, for example, for all your drums and glue them up nicely together with the compressor. Another important thing, because many club systems are still mono, keep your most important song elements present in the mono area. Because if you then go to a club and want to play it out there and you have this nicely stereo wide track, it won't sound great in the club if it has a mono system, because it will just lose a lot of power and a lot of audio information. The general mixing approach should be asking yourself these 3 questions in the beginning, like what is the musical idea of my song? And then what is the most important section? Probably one of your choruses or main parts. And then try to identify the most important instruments in that most important section. For example, in your drop part, that's probably your kick and maybe your snare and also your main melody or chord and bass. And if you adjust them first and then you go and adjust everything else relatively to those elements, then you're in a good way. And afterwards, you will move to the second most important section of your track and repeat that process. And you'll do that until you're finished, basically. And here's a general overview of the frequency range. You can see the different areas: sub, bass, low, mids, human range, and high frequencies here. And you have a couple of tips down here how to use your equalizer in the different areas. And also down here you can see where you usually put your drum elements. Alright, so let's move on.